Well, it was a busy week of mixed martial arts action in the world of MMA, and we are for the better, as they say. We're back again with the midweek press for midweek report for Combat Press. I'm already getting bloopered here. My name is Riley Contick, and as always, I am joined by my esteemed colleague Matt Quiggins. Matt, how you doing today?
Pretty good. How you doing, man?
Doing pretty well myself. Well, we had a very busy weekend of MMA, but before we get to things, obviously we want to plug the website. Obviously, you can go to combatpress.com for all your latest news, interviews, previews, etc. You can check out my previously published, or recently published, that should be, women's MMA rankings, which are come out every month. You can check out everything there. That, again, is at combatpress.com. You can check them out on Twitter at Combat Press. You can check myself out on Twitter as well, all 273 of my followers, at Big Riles MMA, and my friend Mr. Quiggins, I will pull his screen up right now, is at Quiggins MMA. So you can follow each of us on Twitter. Okay, let's get right down to it. We had a very busy weekend of MMA. We had some pay-per-view, we had some free television, we had some half and half with Invicta. Half was free, half was pay. So let's start off, obviously, with the most important card. We had UFC 184. Headlined by a UFC Bantamweight Championship bout between Ronda Rousey and Kat Zingano. Coming into this bout, many people thought that Zingano was one of the biggest challenges to Ronda Rousey's title, and I think most people would agree that was the consensus. And then 14 seconds into the fight, Ronda Rousey was able to score a quick scramble into her signature armbar for a quick victory and a retention of her UFC title. Kat Zingano obviously upset with her performance, only getting 14 seconds in the octagon, but knowing how skilled she is, so she'll probably be back there at some point. So, Quiggins, assess the main event on Saturday. Was it more of a bang kind of just opportunity presented itself, or is Ronda Rousey really this good at this point?
Well, I mean, the one thing I noticed, because, everyone's put it on Instagram and Vine and whatever, as far as the video, because it is that short. The one thing I said that someone needed to do with Ronda was pressure her right off the bat, and I thought that would be something that something that would work. Instead, she ran into it, and I think Ronda just adjusted. She's even said, I wanted to make sure I stayed off my back. And that armbar was, something she's never pulled off, not like that. So really, it was just, she really is that good. And I think, Kat tried something different, and, it cost her. And to be honest, I'm pretty sure she tapped at 12 seconds, and they let it, the official time's 14, but she definitely tapped way before that.
Yeah, it was an interesting finish. When the armbar came, I saw it and I saw the pressure, but I was like, it doesn't look from a traditional position, which obviously it was not. And it was very, very interesting the way that she finished that, because everyone I was at the bar with was like, well, that wasn't an armbar, was it? I go, it absolutely was an armbar. It's just not one that you usually see. It was very, very different. So it was very, very cool. Very impressive. Very, very cool finish from Ronda Rousey. Didn't get to see much. I don't think they struck for more than, a second when Kat threw that knee. They scrambled very crazily, and then the armbar just kind of fell into place. So where do you think Ronda Rousey goes from here? There's plenty of contenders. Even though she seemingly cleaned out the division, there's still a couple of people left. You got, the four-horsewoman conqueror, Betcha Koheta, who's worked her way up the ladder and has, really the storyline to warrant a title shot. You have Jessica Ai, who's right in the contention there. You have Miesha Tate for a third fight, who's, in my eyes, earned her way back into a title shot, despite the fact that she has lost to Ronda twice. So who would you throw in there with her next?
Yeah, I mean, you've already listed them, and really I know Jessica Ai's even saying at this point she's going to hurt somebody if she doesn't get the next shot. The Betts Guerrero fight is probably what they're going to be able to market. They'll end up giving, if they don't go with Miesha, they'll give Miesha one more fight, kind of, wait in the wings, but Miesha did bring her into the third round. Even though she did bring her into the third round, I don't think she was her toughest, but it was an entertaining fight, and it, really let Ronda showcase that she's good everywhere. So any of the three that you mentioned would probably be all right with me.
Yeah, a lot of people talking about Cyborg, and obviously that's not going to happen because she has not taken a bantamweight fight yet, and it was announced in the aftermath of her fight, which we'll talk about later, that she will be fighting actually on International Fight Week at an Invicta card against an opponent to be named in the featherweight division. So obviously that's out of question, but I think I agree. I think the Betcha Koheta fight, she hasn't fought for the title. She's undefeated. She's beaten two of Rousey's teammates, Makes for a nice storyline. I think most people with a preconceived notion that Ronda would probably win that fight fairly easy, but again, you got to give it to her. And again, Rousey didn't take any damage in this fight, so conceivably she could be turning around in the next couple months and taking a fight against Cajeda,
Yeah,
just
she's got
depending on what they
a
decide.
whopping 7-day suspension.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't even know why she got 7 days. To be honest, I think it's precautionary, but she didn't even get. I don't think she got struck once, and
No, there actually wasn't I mean, besides the knee that was thrown, it didn't hit, so there was
right.
no strikes thrown in this fight.
Exactly, which is it's very hard to believe that they would give an but obviously I think it's a mandatory thing. So
Yeah.
yeah. So and then Zingano, where do you think she goes from here?
Well, that was the other thing. They talked about Ronda. It's been said that Ronda said, she wants to do it again, give her another chance. And I think give Kat another fight. Do I necessarily want to see her fight Miesha Tate again? Maybe not. I mean, it was a good fight, but that's where we stand. The Betts Carrera put her up against Ronda, put Miesha and Zingano for the number one. Let them do it again because the Holly Holm talk has kind of quieted down.
Right, and we'll get to that in a second, obviously. But I think Zingano. I don't think I would give her an immediate title shot rematch. She didn't deserve it. She lost in 14 seconds. That's what happened. She wasn't the champion, so she's got to re-earn it. So, but I think definitely, I think if Betch Queira gets a fight, I think either a rematch with Miesha Tate or even going up against a girl who's also coming off a loss, and Sarah McMahon, who actually lost to Miesha Tate, I think would be a nice matchup as well to see which one of those girls kind of gets back on the horse and rides towards the title shot. So obviously not a lot of women in their division, but options. There are options because that's just how it is with them.
I love the Four Horsewoman reference there. That was beautiful.
It was unintentional, but anyways, I see what you did there. But speaking of women, and you actually just mentioned one of them, Holly Holm made her UFC debut in the co-main event. Very bright lights taking on Raquel Pennington. 3-round fight was not the most eventful fight, not the most exciting fight in recent history, but Holly Holm sneaks out with a split decision victory. I believe that the decision, in my opinion, was correct, although it was pretty close, and Raquel made it definitely a fight. Did you actually catch this fight?
I didn't. I caught the highlights, and just seeing, Holm was definitely nervous. She's been waiting a long time. And I mean, even seeing her, when they were, making sure she was ready to go, she was shaking.
Oh my God! I'm glad you mentioned that. That was my big thing with what happened on the night. The minute she walked out, and it's hard to believe a world champion boxer could be as nervous as she was. But she was. You're absolutely right. And I pointed that out when I was watching with my friends. I said, look how violently her body is shaking. She is absolutely terrified right now. And, that was the first thing I noticed as well. And I think it reflected in her performance because I've never seen her that tentative before. And I've never really seen her kind of back down the way that she did. She's usually very imposing with her fights. So to see her perform that way, but maybe she had to get the octagon jitters out beforehand. But obviously, even she said the title talks have been halted a little bit. So what do you think Holly Holm goes from here?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, we've already kind of, in our eyes, matched up Miesha with Kat. Just think that would be a good fight. I mean, I don't think Holly deserves, that high of competition, even though now I think she's ranked, top 10, according to the rankings.
The rankings kind of suck, but
yeah, I don't even want to get started on that. We'll be here all night.
Yeah, exactly. The one that came up in my head, and it's actually one we already mentioned. We matched up the top two, and the next top two is Jessica Ai. I think that'd be a very interesting fight. Jessica's also a very good boxer, obviously probably not on the same skill level as Holly Holm, but I think it would be a nice challenge for both ladies. If Holm can beat Ai, maybe she erases the doubt that we got in that Pennington fight. And if Ai can win, she can really prove that she does deserve a title shot because, Jessica Ai is legit. She's a natural 125er, but she's looked very, very strong at 135.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of a disappointing debut for Holm, but she can really only go up from there unless she loses her next fight. So, moving on to the next bout, it was a pair of slumping welterweights by the names of Jake Ellenberger and Josh Koscheck. It was actually a somewhat entertaining fight, better than I expected, and it ends in a north-south choke submission victory for Jake Ellenberger. That actually had Koscheck foaming and drooling out of his mouth as he was being choked out, and they showed it in instant replay at the bar. And I got to say, the people there, it was a crowd pleaser. So obviously, I think we can assume, we don't have to get too much into it, that Josh Koscheck is pretty much done. And by pretty much, I mean, I think we can assume he is. But Jake Ellenberger, hasn't looked good in a lot of his last couple of fights, but he looked better here. Was this more of a product of him kind of getting back, and not to use the reference again, but getting back on the horse, or was it him running into a guy that's really just finished?
I think it's more so the latter. I mean, Koscheck's pretty much done. He hasn't looked the same. Like you said, his chin has been tested, more over those last 3 fights than it has, in a very long time. The last time I can remember Koscheck getting knocked out that violently, it was, Anthony Johnson. So
I don't think Anthony Johnson knocked out Josh Koscheck.
Was it?
Nope.
Why am I thinking that?
I don't know.
Hold on.
Yeah, no, Koscheck never knocked out Anthony Johnson. Koscheck actually choked out Anthony Johnson after faking.
Oh, that's what it was.
Faking an illegal knee or something like that. I'm trying to remember who was the one that knocked out Koscheck, but it was not Anthony Johnson. Regardless, don't want to spend too much time on this fight because it's really not that important. But Ellenberger gets back on the proverbial horse. I was thinking, as a matchup, maybe a guy like Rick Story, guys with similar styles, and really both coming off wins and both near the top part of the division. Obviously, Ellenberger's been slumping, but he's undoubtedly at that top end of the division. So I don't know about what you think about for matchups for Ellenberger, but I thought Rick Story was a good one. Do you have an idea?
Yeah, I think Rick Story. Give him like a I don't know what we consider Rick Story a top 15, top 25. I don't know where he really falls in that mix. I mean, he's had some impressive performances, but at the same time, maybe not so much.
Right, and he's actually looked better since moving to the MMA lab. Moving on to the welterweight division, we had an interesting fight between Richard Walsh and Alan Jouban. It was pretty competitive throughout until the ending of the fight, obviously. I don't know if you caught this one, Quiggins, but Alan Jouban lands a picture-perfect standing elbow strike to the temple of Richard Walsh, which downed him, and then the referee stepped in for the knockout victory. Jouban with the victory there. Richard Walsh, though, in defeat, actually looked pretty solid. Better chance than I would have given him. So what is your analysis on Alan Jouban, both in his victory and as a fighter?
Well, I mean, really, I went with Filthy Rich for, my own reasons, but that's, beyond the point. I think that Jouban's really someone to really watch out for. His split decision, or his decision loss in, Brazil, of course, to a Brazilian. Very controversial. I mean, other than that, he'd be on, a 3-fight win streak at this point, and he's looked impressive every time.
Yeah.
Now I just want to see who they're going to match him up with, because you don't want to match him up with somebody too high, but, you still want to give him, a tough opponent or a tough, another tough test.
Yeah, there's 3 guys in my mind that I'd love to match up Alan Jouban with, and it goes along with not too highly ranked. One is Stephen Thompson. Both of them are strikers. I think that'd be a very fun fight. I think the second one is Matt Dwyer, coming off of that Superman punch knockout of William Macario. And the third one now is eluding my mind. Santiago Ponzinibbio, who's coming off of that win over Sean Strickland. All 3 of them good strikers, and all 3 of them who could give, in unison with Alan Jouban, an excellent fight, and a fight that would get fans on their feet. They're all strikers. They're all tough. See who the better man is. And, I also fished around Albert Tumenov, but I actually would not like to see those 2 fight. I want to see them both progress slowly, so I don't want to see them fight yet. But definitely down the line, I'd love to see Tumenov versus Jouban as well. So there's really nothing you can do wrong with Jouban. But he already obviously did get a matchup today. He didn't get too much rest off the weekend. He will actually be fighting Brian Ebersol in New Orleans at UFC Fight Night 68. So the brass not giving him much downtime. He already has his next fight booked despite fighting on Saturday. So there's that. And also booked today in New Orleans was Derek Lewis, who also just recently fought on Saturday. He will take on Sean Jordan in New Orleans, UFC 68. So a couple of fights added to that card today. Some card also was added to over the weekend. I believe Dan Henderson, Tim Boach, and a couple of other fights. So that New Orleans card actually shipping up to be a pretty good card.
Yeah, Philippou and Musasi.
That is in the Philippines, actually, but yes, and that was another thing. There was that fight, and there was another one that was Neil Magny versus Hyun-Gyu Lim. That was also in the Philippines, and there was one more that was added to New Orleans, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. But yeah, a lot of fights, good fights recently added. Matt Mitrione versus Ben Rothwell. That was in New Orleans as well. So some good fights have been added recently, but I digress. Moving on to the second to last fight on the card this weekend at UFC 184, we had ourselves a it would be the opening fight. I'm sorry, it was a lightweight bout between Gleison Tibau and Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson made very quick work of what is considered to be one of the better lightweights in the UFC, especially given his longevity in the company, choking him out on the ground after putting him, hurting him with some strikes. So, Quiggins, given the last, 10 seasons of The Ultimate Fighter, is Tony Ferguson the best winner of The Ultimate Fighter in the last 10 seasons?
In the last 10?
Something like that, roughly.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I can't even think of half of the other winners.
I think the only one I can think of that would be competitive is John Dodson or Kelvin Gastelum, but given his recent string of victories, I think Tony Ferguson has really flown into the radar as one of the better Ultimate Fighter winners. You know, a lot of times we get some Ultimate Fighter winners that are somewhat questionable. We get some Ultimate Fighter winners that don't pan out. Ferguson was a guy that I don't think a lot of people expected much out of, and he's turned into really one of the better lightweights in the UFC at this point. You know, you take a guy like a Colton Smith, or you take a guy like I don't even know. I'm trying to think of some other guys that didn't really pan out as winners. I don't know. There's been a few of them, but regardless, you know, yeah, I mean, about like Mac Danzig, for example, or a guy like that. You know, they didn't really, or Amir Sadal, they didn't really work out. They were not stars like they could have been. But you have this guy Ferguson now, who's really just running up the lightweight ranks and beating really tough opposition. So I think he's really become a guy to watch out for at 155 pounds, and a guy that's really, taken the division by storm, and he's going to be a guy that's going to be inching closer and closer to that top 10 in that title picture.
And there's another thing. He's not even ranked, like, top 10.
Well, I don't know about him being top 10 yet, but he's definitely, in my book, top 15. It's one of the more stacked divisions, but,
yes,
definitely a guy to keep your eye on in that division. And actually, he's a guy that won a season that I think had Miles Jury not gotten injured during that season, I don't think Ferguson would have won. I think Miles Jury would have won. Obviously, Jury was then recasted for the Ultimate Fighter 15, but, he really has overcome some bad injuries and some inactivity to come back in recent times and really kind of run the table, and he's getting close. I think, at this point, you got to give him a top 15 guy. Tebow was up there too, and he destroyed Tebow. It wasn't even close. Yeah. So, now looking back on the UFC 184 preliminary card, was there any fight that you want to mention just by looking at the results?
I'm gonna butcher his name, Ron Conero.
Oh, Juan Conero.
Yeah. Did not expect that at all. Really, I mean, and it'll spark a whole conversation about refs needing to pay a little bit closer attention to to when guys are out. And we had two examples of that on the same card. The Munoz fight and then Koscheck going out. So that I think that's going to spark a whole new argument that we can talk about later.
And not only that, the Ruan Potts Derek Lewis fight, where in between rounds, Ruan Potts said, "I'm finished." He said that, and nobody did anything about it. And he went back out there in the second round and got his head punched in. So that's another instance. So there were, I guess you could say, 3 instances of that on this card. So the one that I wanted to talk about was the Tim Means knockout of Diego Lima. I had picked Tim Means. A lot of people went with Diego Lima. I just thought that Means was a bad stylistic matchup for him. And he came through. And Tim Means is another guy that is very violent, very exciting. He may never be a world champion in the UFC, but he's going to be that guy that consistently fills out cards and has people tuning in to watch him fight. He's never in a boring fight. So, that knockout was big for him. And I also want to mention the Valmir Lazaro fight versus James Krause. I think James Krause should have won that fight, and he dropped a split decision. I really hope the UFC keeps him because he's a very valuable lightweight. Yeah. But he's also, I think, lost 2 in a row. I think 3 out of his last 4. So, I think that controversial decision should lend him another fight, but we'll see what happens with James Krause.
I'll touch on that really quick, too, just because, with Krause, if you look at it, the Bobby Green fight, he took, 2 or 3 shots to the groin, and that really probably led to why that fight was, ended up the way it was. So really looking at what he's done, the Sam Stout fight, Jamie Varner was an injury, but still he was winning that fight.
But he kicked his ankle broke.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I hope they keep him. We'll see what happens, especially because he's a top 30 guy in my opinion. So in the lightweight division. But yeah, that was UFC 184. Very, very, very fun card. I was really happy that I watched it over the weekend. Obviously, I didn't spend money on it. I went to the bar to watch it, but I digress. Moving on, we're going to go to something that was on UFC Fight Pass Friday night. Invicta 11. Mr. Quiggins, did you watch any of these fights?
I was not able to, no.
You were not able to. Well, unfortunately, you missed a great night of fights. Again, Invicta delivers with a great show, mixed with some awesome fights and some great finishes. The main event saw Chris Cyborg take less than a minute to completely thrash Charmaine Tweet to retain her Invicta 145-pound title. Leading to speculation that she'll fight Ronda. That's obviously not the case at this point. Where does Cyborg go from here? She seemingly cleaned out the featherweight division. The number 2 featherweight in the world is Marlush Kunin, and she's already destroyed her on multiple occasions. So what does she do from here?
Whoever they put in front of her, really. I mean, it's going to be tough, like you said. I wouldn't say she's doing it the same way Ronda, is seemingly cleaning out hers, but it's like a slower process. She's not fighting as top of girls as as well known, and I think Charmaine Tweet's record was 6-5.
Oh, now it's 6-5.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not on paper. It doesn't look like the best fight. Charmaine Tweet is still a tough fight. Who do we put in front of her? I couldn't even tell you.
Well, here's the problem that I think Invicta is going to run in with is that Bellator has began to build their women's featherweight division, and some of the top fighters have gone over to Bellator. You have Marlush Kunin, you have Julia Budd, Toledo Nogueira, Annalisa Bucci. So some of these girls that Invicta could put in front of Chris Cyborg are already gone. So they have to find new talent to step up and fight her basically. And I don't think there is anybody that really is left in the Invicta featherweight division. But they're going to have to find her opponent soon because come July when it's International Fight Week, Cyborg is headlining that Invicta 13 card. So they will have to find her an opponent. And Charmaine Tweet was definitely deserving of the title shot given what she's done in recent fights.
Yeah.
But you're right. She was no match, and I think nobody gave her a chance anyways. And on a side note, I don't like how she stole the Ascension's gimmick with the red paint on her hair in the front. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but that's okay.
Your wrestling stuff.
Yeah, my wrestling stuff. We'll briefly talk about the co-main event, which was also the fight of the night, and I thought really just an awesome scrap between strawweights Alexa Grasso and Mizuki Inoue. It went to a decision, and what came of it was a win for Alexa Grasso. So the 21-year-old Mexican fighter has really shot her stock through the ceiling at this point, showed very competent grappling and the superior striking to a girl that we called a prodigy, and really, as Dana White mentioned, 2 girls that should be fighting in the UFC. He said that fight should have been in the UFC. He literally said that.
Yeah.
So, and the same thing goes with same question, I guess, with Irene Aldana, who earned a victory over Colleen Schneider. Are these 2 Mexican fighters, Grasso and Aldana, should they be UFC bound by UFC 188, which takes place in Mexico City?
Absolutely. Especially, with what I saw with, Alexa Grasso the last time out.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, they kind of need to, and it'll be a nice marketing scheme to get more people into the card.
I agree, and you know what? You look at the talent in Mexico right now. It's obviously a developing landscape, but I think you can solidly say that the 2 best Mexican MMA fighters at this point, Mexican-born and not American, Mexican, are Aldana and Grasso. I think they're the best, and they're both women, and that's not a knock on the men. I think A, they're very good, but B, the men are still developing. See, they're developing in a stage of male MMA where everything's already developed because it developed 10 years ago or whatever. Mm-hmm. Women's MMA is still very young, and that these girls are just taking advantage of how good and skilled they are early on, at a time when women are really just starting to get into the sport more and more. So yeah, I would venture to say that Grasso and Aldana are probably the 2 best Mexican fighters in the world right now. So, and looking at the results, any of those that you want to talk about?
Not off the top of my head. What about you?
There was one. I mean, obviously, I wanted to talk about the Deanna Bennett fight. She made a successful drop to strawweight and earned a victory, but that's not the one I want to talk about. There was a different strawweight bout that really caught my eye, and I had mentioned it earlier. It was on our toe-to-toe with Brian Henderson. Jamie Moyle earned a vicious rear naked choke victory over J.J. Aldrich. She is 2-0 as a pro, but she is legit as they come. Both fights I've seen in her. One was live in Iowa when she fought Jenny Liu in her pro debut. And this one on Friday night against what I just said, Aldrich, she has been phenomenal. Her striking is very good, and her grappling is equally as good. She choked out Aldrich quick, and it looked painful, and it looked tight. If you haven't watched it, I suggest you go back and watch it. She made quick work of a prospect who, beat, as you know, Delaney Owen pretty handily. So, Moyle is really, really talented, and I would not be surprised to see her in UFC colors in the next few fights. That's how good she is. And that's a woman who actually won an amateur tournament to earn an Invicta contract. So she's really earning her stripes, and she's really become a woman to watch out for in the 115-pound division. All right, that was Invicta 11. Moving on to the last results we'll talk about on the weekend, we had Bellator 134. We'll talk about 3 of the major fights there. We'll talk about them very quickly, though. It was headlined by a light heavyweight title bout between Liam McGeary and champion Emmanuel Newton. Very, very entertaining fight. I believe you watched this card, yes? Very entertaining fight. A lot of it took place on the mat, which was kind of a strategical error, in my opinion, by the champion Emmanuel Newton, who's clearly getting out grappled by Liam McGeary, constantly getting put in submissions and stuff, but to his credit, never giving up. So obviously McGeary taking the unanimous decision victory and is the new Bellator champion. Where do you think this ranks McGeary in the world rankings? Not just the Bellator rankings, but the world rankings in light heavyweight.
I mean, it definitely shoots him up. Like we talked about, Emmanuel Newton's entertaining. He just didn't have that, I don't want to say, fan appeal, but, Liam McGeary really showed that he's, he can last 5 rounds. He didn't look to be giving up at any point. Do I put him top 20? I think it's safe to say maybe even a top 15.
Yeah, no, I think he's the real deal, man. I look at guys in the UFC on the roster for the light heavyweight, and I think McGeary can beat a lot of them. I think he can beat a ton of them. I think he could easily be top 15 in the UFC. He reminds me, and it's not just because they're from the same country. He reminds me of a grappling savvy Jimmy Manuwa. I think that the striking is very similar when he's able to get it off, but I think where he and Manuwa differ is that he has a very good ground game, and Manuwa's is more of a top grappling based, but not as tested either. I mean, he has good takedown defense, but I think McGeary is really a guy that the UFC may have missed the boat on, because this is definitely a guy with well-rounded skills and a guy with a very good killer instinct. Because honestly, if he wasn't fighting Emmanuel Newton, and I'll let you talk in a second, I think any other guy he would have fought in that situation would have tapped out to those triangle chokes, and that key lock he had. That key lock was nasty.
I thought his arm was going to break.
Oh yeah, I know. I was looking away. I was absolutely looking away on that. I thought he was going to snap Emmanuel Newton's arm on live TV.
And it looked just like when Frank Mir was doing it too.
Yep.
And I saw his shoulder start, and I'm going, this is live TV now. This isn't pay-per-view.
I think there is a delay on it, but I mean, regardless, the fact that would have been on TV would have been absolutely disgusting. And and I actually was shielding my eyes. I did not want to see Emmanuel Newton's arm break. And to his credit, he didn't give up, and he got out of it. So.
And I think what's good about this is, number one, I think McGeary is going to learn a lot, because he was in a lot of positions and he wasn't committing to them enough to do anything on the ground. I mean, he'd have it, and then he'd try to go for something else. And I understand why he was trying to do it, but I think it's something he can definitely learn from. And I think, looking at the fight, did you score it the same way?
Yeah, I believe I can't remember what I scored it on. I have it on my Twitter feed. I'm not going to look it up, though. I either had it 48-47 or 40. I think we had 49-46. I think I had it 4 rounds to 1. Newton had a good round or two, and it was pretty close. But I mean, for the most part, Newton's submission attempts and his activity off the back and all that was really what kind of did it for me. Newton got takedowns, but it was who did more with the takedowns. It was the guy off his back, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, McGeary was definitely working off his back, and he looked about as surprised as anyone else when they read that decision. So
I don't know why it was so shocking. I can see maybe why on traditional standards, but he is a guy who outworked his opponent. and Newton really did nothing there to warrant him retaining his championship.
I think it was.
I hate to say that because I think Newton's an awesome fighter and I love him.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
But again, that was a very fun fight. I was actually glad that I tuned in to watch that.
Mm-hmm.
Do we do an immediate rematch?
I don't know. I have a feeling Bellator won't do the immediate rematch on this one. I know they had the championship clause. I don't know if that's still in effect with Coker in charge. I say they're probably going to put him up against Linton Vassell.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll do that. I think if anything, they would go with somebody else before him. But I would love to see an immediate rematch because the fight was so fun, and I want to see if they can resolve it with another 5 rounds. So maybe get a more decisive victory. Although I do think that McGeary clearly won. Moving on to the co-main event, we had a heavyweight, kind of a feature fight. It was King Mo versus Czech Congo. I don't want to talk about this very long because it doesn't warrant many words, but King Mo takes a wrestling heavy victory and then gets booed by the fans, and then kind of goes heelish, calling out some people and calling out the crowd. Just briefly give me your analysis of this fight.
Well, I mean, I don't want to say I'm impressed with King Mo, but I mean he was a smaller guy and he was able to control Congo very well. The fact that Congo couldn't really do anything against a guy who usually fights a weight class lower is a little unnerving. But to be completely honest, I've never really been a fan of Congo. So, there was almost more entertainment in the minutes after the fight had ended than during the entire fight when they tried to take the microphone away.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not going to say much. I thought it was a very boring fight. It was a very safe fight for Mo, though, fighting up a weight class, so you can't really hate on him that much. Kind of called out Tito Ortiz after the fight. I think that's the fight to make. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
I don't think they'll make it. I don't know.
I think that's the biggest fight they can make in their light heavyweight division at this point, just based on name. That could easily headline a card or be a co-main event of another card that's one of their bigger cards. So, I mean, that's the one I think of, and I think they'd build it up nicely. Obviously neither guy is really top notch anymore, but I think that's the one you're going to want to make. There's at least some bad blood there. So, the last fight I wanted to talk about was Paul Daly, Andre Santos. Daly taking a decision victory against a very tough, very resilient Andre Santos, who probably should have been knocked out on multiple occasions and really kind of persevered despite that. But Paul Daly, after the fight, saying he's not ready for a title shot against Douglas Lima. So where does he go from here?
It's pretty interesting to see, I mean, because I think everybody thought he was just going to blow through Santos, including himself. That's very humble of him to even say, I don't think I'm ready. Where does he go? Who's left to fight? It's got a pretty wide division, but this seems to be your specialty of who you fight next.
I mean, it depends who's really on the roster, honestly, and I don't think that they have the strongest welterweight roster at this point. They got rid of Ben Askren, they got a bunch of guys from the old regime are gone, so it's really Paul Daly is the guy that they need to step up and take this title shot. But if he doesn't feel ready, they're obviously you're not going to force him to do it. So. My big critique on the card, which obviously was hampered by injuries, I honestly love the production value of Bellator these days. I thought that I think the Titantron's awesome, the old school wrestling walkout screen. At the top of the show, this is my only critique, but I know why they did this because that was the theme. It was the British invasion, British versus U.S. So the national anthems are playing and they're going down, and on the American side they have Emmanuel Newton, who's American. They have King Mo, who's American. They have Andre Santos, who's Brazilian, so he's not even really American. I know that was supposed to be Douglas Lima representing America. They have Sokaju, who's American citizen from Cameroon, and then they had Curtis Millender, who was American. But it was even funnier on the other side. UK, you had Liam McGeary, who's British. You have Paul Daly, who's British. You have Linton Vassell, who's British. Then you have Czech Congo, who's French. And then you have Brennan Ward, who's American. So they had two guys that are not technically American on the American side. They had two guys that weren't technically British on the British side, and then one of the Brits was American. They were just calling him the Irish Bad Boy because that's his nickname. So I thought that was kind of funny. But I thought it gave it a big show feel with the national anthems and the track suits and the overall production value. So I think if Bellator can continue to do that, they're going to find a niche in the MMA world, and that's big. because Strikeforce kind of failed to do that as much as, I mean, they did, but they didn't at the same time, and Bellator's kind of filling in the cracks. They've kind of become pro wrestling MMA, was what it is.
Yeah, well,
promos and good production value.
Kimbo versus Shamrock.
Well, yeah, that's right. I don't think we talked about that. We could talk about it very briefly. We got Kimbo versus Shamrock. Will you be tuning in?
I don't know, man.
What do you mean you don't know? I
don't think I'll be able to look away. Like,
that's what I'm saying. It's such a horrible fight that you have to watch, and I think if they could put a couple of legit fights on there, like between actual like contenders in Bellator, I think it'd be a really great card, actually.
Yeah.
You have the freak show at the top of the card, but then it's kind of like ECW. You have the technical wrestling at the bottom of the card, and then you got the hardcore matches at the top. I don't know. Could work. Anyways, we're going to talk about some quick picks for 2 MMA regional events this weekend. We have RFA, Resurrection Fighting Alliance, as we've been calling it, the unofficial UFC feeder system. In the headliner, welterweights Ben Smith and Indalecio Tat Romero will be squaring off. Quiggins, any thoughts on this main event, and will the winner go to the UFC?
Well, if I knew more about these guys, I could tell you, but at this point, I'll leave this one to you.
Actually, I think these guys are 2 under-the-radar guys. I think they're both solid prospects. I don't think they're headliners of an RFA card. It just kind of goes to show you how they're kind of watered down a little bit at this point. But I think Ben Smith, if he gets a win, that would be another RFA main event win, and I think that would push him into the UFC eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Romero might need another win or 2 to get that solidified, but it should be an exciting fight at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
In the co-main event, we have a well-traveled veteran making his return from retirement, Jeff Curran, taking on one of 2 brothers that'll be on this card, Melvin Bloomer. His brother Marvin will be fighting earlier on the card. So what are your feelings on Jeff Curran's return to MMA?
I'm excited to see what he's going to do. I mean, Jeff Curran wasn't always the most technical guy, but he was, like you said, well-traveled and a seasoned guy. Got a lot of experience under his belt, so it'll be interesting to see how he fares, coming out of retirement. Who's to say he hasn't been training this whole time? So
right. And by the way, I just got a text from Wayne Dumas saying, "Great ECW reference."
Thanks.
So I'm very good. I guess I'm very good at reassociating. But yeah, no, I actually live about a half hour from Jeff Curran's gym,
Okay.
and he's really an awesome Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy. When it comes to groundwork, he's really a special ground fighter. I think his boxing is very, very suspect. I think we saw that in the UFC, the way he throws punches and finishes punches. But if he gets a guy down, he's really in his world. So I think Bloomer is definitely is a solid fighter from Minnesota. But Curran's been he's been around the block, as they say, and if you can get him down, he's gonna teach him a few lessons, I think. So that's RFA 24. That'll be on Friday on Access TV. You can check your local listings for that. We also, this is out in our buddy Rob Tatum's neck of the woods, Fight to Win, kind of an under-the-radar Colorado promotion that's been putting on some good fights lately. The main event has a UFC veteran, Chris Camozzi, a personal favorite of mine, always exciting, always, he was always a very durable, tough guy, taking on Wes Swofford in the middleweight division of that card in the main event. What are your thoughts on Chris Camozzi? Obviously, he left the UFC on a 4-fight losing streak, but can he, given how exciting he is and how willing he was to step up against top opponents on late notice, and seeing that he got robbed twice, I'd say twice in his UFC losing streak, can he get back to the UFC?
I think so. I mean, he wins this, depending on how he wins it, maybe one more fight. I mean, how many has he had since he left? It's at least, 2?
I thought it was only 1. I can check it right now. I know I'm pretty sure it was 1. I think he had a fight right at not long after the tall loss, which in my opinion he won.
Yeah, that was.
I think that was a brutal robbery, and I freaked out on Twitter when that happened because I am a Chris Camozzi fan. I try to be subjective, but I was pretty pissed about that. I was also pissed when
he's had 1. You're right.
Yeah, he beat Jeremy Kimball. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, and that split decision loss to Bruno Santos was also highly questionable.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to argue the other 2. The Jacare, he got choked out, and the Lorenz Larkin fight, Larkin give him a schoolyard beatdown. But Swofford's a guy who he doesn't have the sexiest record, but he's definitely a tough out. And Kimball's a Bellator veteran, so yeah, I think if you can get a win here, I think it would definitely take 1 more, and then he'd have to probably take a late notice fight to get back in.
Yeah.
just given the 4-fight losing streak. But he's definitely a guy I'd like to see back in, just because he's tough as nails. He's always moving forward. He's really just a guy that's very fan pleasing. So I'd like to see him back as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But also on that card, I mean, some really good Colorado talent, local talent. Tony Sims is fighting. I don't know if you know Tony Sims, a very good fighter out of Colorado, as well as Cody Mumma, who was actually on the Ultimate Fighter 19, was eliminated in the elimination round. I think it was by Anton Berzin, one of the two. Regardless, an interesting fight. I don't know where that fight might be actually airing. It might be a Go Fight Live, but I'm not sure. So if you can, try and take a look at that card. Okay, that's enough for the previews here. Just talk about some news pieces. First, I think the biggest piece of news and the most shocking piece of news, which was actually broken by Front Row Brian, but potentially taken by somebody else in the media. Burt Watson has, I guess you could say, to nicely put it, resigned. I'd say he probably quit under weird circumstances as the director. What is he? The director of fighter relations or something?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Basically, he's the what they call him, the babysitter of the stars. You see him at the weigh-ins. He's always making sure that people are on weight. Suddenly quit. I don't know exactly why he quit, but I had something to do with some disagreement, and he has walked out on the company. He thanked the Fertittas and Dana White, but it does not appear that Burt Watson will be coming back. So Quiggins, what's your thought? Obviously a beloved figure in the UFC.
He really was, and I mean, when we were down in Fort Lauderdale, we were down there as fans, and he walked up to us, introduced himself, one of the nicest guys I've probably ever met. That being said, it's really weird to see this, sudden departure, because like you said, he's been around for a while, and the talk about something going on with how fighters were cutting weight and things like that. It's just kind of an awkward leave, and who's going to replace him.
Yeah, I mean, obviously from a professional standpoint, he's second to none, really. I mean, he's a true professional in the sport, and just as a public UFC figure, like you said, very beloved, awesome guy. I never got a chance to actually speak to him one-on-one, more of a distance, just seeing how he treated people. Very nice guy, very professional. So obviously the fighters on Twitter kind of pouring out their disparage of him leaving. So it just shows you how outstretched his personality was, and how he really affected fighters and how they really appreciated him. So it's going to be kind of sad to see him leave. Would love to see him come back if they can come to some terms, but I honestly just don't see that at this point. Another piece of news we had is now that their cage fighting is legal in this part of Australia, we are going to have UFC 193 on pay-per-view live from Melbourne. It'll obviously be a different time for us here in America, but a big step forward for the UFC in Australia. What are your thoughts on them getting into Melbourne?
It's about time.
Yep. Now all we need is New York, and I think we'll be in good shape. But that's a big win. I'm sure Neil Rook, who is our writer down under, is very, very excited that Melbourne has gotten their big show. Lastly, we have the Ultimate Fighter 21, which has been announced formally. I'm sure we already heard the rumors earlier about that being a gym versus gym season, and that's exactly what it ended up being. It is going to be American Top Team versus the Black Zillions. Excuse me, got a little tongue twisted there. So Quiggins, what do you think about this season? And actually, before I do that, I should probably announce who's actually on the season. Let me very quickly pull up the roster. I should have had that, but I'm a little falling behind here. Let's see here, Tough 21. So when it comes to the American Top Team, did you actually, before I get into that, did you see the trailer that they showed for the audience? Oh, you should check it out. I know that Jason Floyd had it on his website. I think MMA Report or whatever. He had the trailer up. It's on YouTube. It's actually very well, and it's going to cause a lot of interest, so I'm very excited for that.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a list of the guys on the show. American Top Team, obviously coached by Dan Lambert. Robbie Lawler will also be one of the coaches. Will be Marcelo Alfaya, who should be a very recognizable name, Steve Carl, Nathan Coy, Michael Graves, Hader Hassan, Saba Hamasi, Uros Jurisic, and Steve Montgomery. And the Black Zillions, which are coached by Glenn Robinson, and will also have some coaching done by Rashad Evans and Vitor Belfort, will be Valdir Araujo, Carrington Banks, Luis Firmino, also known as Buscape, Jason Jackson, Vicente Luke, Andrus Nakahara, Felipe Portela, and Cam Usman. So, in taking a look at the roster, what do you think of this season?
It's going to be interesting because I really think that they needed a revamp.
Yep.
You know, they tried the live version. It was awful. You
Yeah.
know, they tried women and men in the same house. Yeah, it was all right. You know, they tried the season of all women, entertaining, but still not, drawing in the fans the way they needed to. And now, fighters across the country have a vested interest in this. People who fight, who train in an American Top Team and train at Black Zillions, really I think will have a more of a vested interest, and it's bragging rights.
Yep. I think this is a great concept of the show, and I'd love to see them do a second version of this. My idea would have been Team Alpha Male versus Nova União, just given the heated rivalry between their gym right now. But in looking at the rosters, a very heavy mix of both young and experienced prospects and some very well-traveled veterans. I mean, you take a look at the rosters. Marcelo Alfaya, World Series of Fighting, veteran, who's almost beat John Fitch in one of his recent bouts. Yeah. Steve Carl, a former World Series of Fighting champion. Nathan Coy, a Strikeforce veteran. You take a look at the Black Zillions. You got guys like Luis Firmino, a Pride veteran. Who would have thought another Pride veteran would make it on the show since Cristiano Marcelo? And Valdir Araujo, another guy with a lot of experience. And then you got the guys, in my opinion, who have the most upside because they're young prospects. Your Mike Graves, your Urus Jurisic, Steve Montgomery, Cam Usman, who I think has the biggest upside of anybody on the show. So it's very interesting, and I think that the gym concept is going to be a huge help for the show, which, like you said, is a lot of people think has become stale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and you being a Florida guy, what did you think of this roster, and especially because it'll be taped down there?
It's going to be exciting. I've got there's some guys down in Fort Lauderdale that train. They've been training with Black Zillions, a pro fighter around here. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if I can't get down there.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited for this. And what's kind of weird is I think it's actually going to be airing at the same time as Tough Brazil 4. Obviously, I think Tough Brazil 4 will be on Fight Pass and then Globo in Brazil, obviously. But they'll have two seasons going on at the same time. So if you're like me, you'll watch both of them because you're a psycho. But if you're most people, you'll probably just stick to one, which will most likely be the one that's on Fox Sports, which, of course, is The Ultimate Fighter 21. But in watching the preview, which, again, if you haven't, I suggested after the show's over, great trailer for that, and I'm really looking forward to it because these are two gyms that really don't like each other, and I think that's the legitimate type of heat that people want to see. So that is The Ultimate Fighter 21. The last thing we're going to talk about before we end this program tonight is a Wrestling Minute, as is the tradition of this show. Just really quickly wanted to talk about the road to WrestleMania, as they call it, and how I think it's really falling flat. With WrestleMania around the corner, you really want to build up interest and get people buying your product, and at this point, I just don't see it. You have several guys carrying their entire feuds because they're the only guys ever there. You have Triple H carrying his Sting feud because they never have Sting on TV. You have Bray Wyatt carrying his Undertaker feud because Undertaker's never on TV. Honestly, Roman Reigns, if it wasn't for Paul Heyman, he'd be carrying that program as well because Brock Lesnar's never there, and he's got contract issues and all that stuff. But that's beside the point. But it's really falling flat. The Giant Memorial Battle Royal just doesn't feel like as big as it was last year when it was in this first thing. It just seems like everything that's been built up is just not interesting. I think the most interesting heel they have is Seth Rollins, and I think that he'll probably fight Randy Orton at WrestleMania, but I think that they're soft shooting it too much at this point. So there's just a lot of problems. I didn't even watch Raw last night. I just read the recap. I just couldn't. I was like, last week's episode was terrible. I didn't want to watch it again. And from what I've read, I didn't miss much. So I think the WWE is really shooting themselves in the foot, and they really need to kind of elevate themselves to get better, because otherwise people are going to stop buying their product. And wrestling's already kind of a dying art to begin with. But I don't know if you heard about this. Samoa Joe is a free agent now that he's not with TNA. And he actually competed at Ring of Honor this weekend. But I've read on some of the dirt sheets that he's very close to signing a deal with WWE. Triple H is a huge proponent of Samoa Joe. What would you think of a Samoa Joe in the WWE? You don't know much about Samoa?
I know him, but just not enough to follow.
Yeah, see, I think with him, I think they'd let him be himself, but if you sign him, you can't have him be like Kevin Steen where he has to change his name. Obviously Kevin Steen's not as big as Samoa Joe, so I'd hope they let him keep the Samoa Joe name when he came. He doesn't have the prototypical body type, so I'm always afraid when they bring in guys that aren't your typical bodybuilder that they won't use him correctly, because Joe is a pudgy guy, let's be honest, but he's also very athletic and very strong, and he's an awesome worker. So, we'll see what happens. I'd like to see Samoa Joe there because he's awesome, but we'll see what happens. WWE would be smart to add a guy like him. All right, I think that's about enough for tonight on the Midweek Report. As always, check out combatpress.com for all the latest in interviews, previews, etc., etc. You can check them out on Twitter at combatpress. As for the Twitters of me and my friend, I will give you Quiggins' first. His is at Quiggins MMA. Make sure we get him a Fedora sponsor in the future. As for myself, I am at Big Riles MMA. Also a shameless plug. Check out Bleacher Report for me. Tomorrow I have a full breakdown and preview of the Ultimate Fighter 21. Each fighter, I will break down their strengths and weaknesses and their preview and as to where they might do on the show. So check that out on Bleacher Report. It took me a lot of time, so I'd appreciate the read. Other than that, not much else here to plug other than the fact that I still need 1 million followers and I'm still a lot off. So you people really need to get on it, the 7 people that probably watch this show. All right, that does it for us tonight. Enjoy the fights this weekend. There's not a lot of them, but get prepared because the following weekend we have UFC 185 and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. All right? So for Matt Quiggins and myself and representing Combat Press, we thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next week.